American Horror Story, The House on Willow Street. The Arrival. In the heart of Ohio, on a quiet street lined with old maples, there stood a house no one dared to buy. Locals whispered about screams heard at midnight, about lights flickering even when the power was long cut, about children who once vanished after stepping inside. For years, the house at 1467 Willow Street rotted, its porch sagging, its windows black as eyes. But then came Michael Harris, a young journalist from New York, chasing stories of America's haunted places. He rented the house for 3 months, determined to expose the myths. When he stepped inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something metallic like dried blood. The floors groaned as though alive, and the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing claw-like scratches carved into the wood beneath. Michael thought it was just a perfect set for his article, until the first night came. At 3:15 a.m., the sound of footsteps echoed through the upstairs hall, even though he was the only one inside. The voices in the dark. By the second week, Michael's recordings began to capture whispers that weren't there when he pressed the record button. He replayed one tape late at night and nearly dropped his laptop when a child's voice hissed, "Don't stay." He began investigating the house's history. Old newspapers at the local library told a chilling story. In 1978, the Carter family moved into 1467 Willow Street. Within a month, the father murdered his wife and 2 children, claiming that the walls spoke to him. He was found hanging in the basement, his eyes wide open, as if staring at something invisible. Locals said no priest could cleanse the house. Some claimed the basement was a gate, a thin place between the living and the dead. Michael dismissed it as small-town superstition, until he finally dared to descend those basement steps himself. The basement. The basement smelled of damp soil and rust. His flashlight beam wavered across broken furniture and collapsed shelves. In the far corner, he saw symbols burned into the concrete. Circles and strange markings, still blackened though decades had passed. Suddenly, the air turned cold, his breath clouding in front of him. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a woman in a torn nightgown, her face pale, eyes black pits. She raised her hand as if reaching for him, and the walls groaned violently, plaster raining from the ceiling. Michael bolted upstairs, slamming the basement door shut. But when he leaned against it, shaking, he realized the woman's whisper still echoed in his ear. "You can't leave." The door that wouldn't stay shut. Michael slept in the living room with every light on, his camera rolling from the coffee table, and a cheap handheld recorder tucked under his pillow like a talisman. At 3:15 a.m., the radiator ticked, the house sighed, and from the hallway came the slow drag of something heavy across wood. He sat up, holding his breath. The basement door, latched with 2 deadbolts, gave a single hollow knock from the other side, as if a knuckle tapped once and waited to be let in. He forced himself to stand, counting his steps. The air near the door felt 20 degrees colder, thin and sharp, as if the house had a lung and this was where it learned to breathe. He pressed his palm to the wood. It was vibrating lightly, the way a door does when someone on the other side leans against it without wanting you to know. "I'm not opening it," he said, and his own voice came back dull and small. He slid a chair under the knob, dragged a bookcase in front of the frame, then hammered 2 nails into the trim for good measure. The nails slid in like butter, too easy, and when he looked closer he noticed the wood around the frame was riddled with old nail holes and patterns, as if dozens of people before him had tried this very thing. As daylight broke, he decided to leave. The morning should have burned away whatever had crept up from the dark. He threw his duffel into the trunk, tossed the tripod onto the back seat, and turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. He tried again, the starter whining with a dry, animal note. On the 3rd try, the radio flared alive by itself and settled on an AM station drowned in static. Under the hiss, a child's voice threaded through. "It's not the door you should worry about." He killed the ignition so fast his keys skinned his knuckles. He sat in silence, his breath fogging the windshield. The house across the street watched in the rear view, those black windows, the sagging porch. He told himself a battery could die. A radio could misbehave. A coincidence was still a coincidence. He walked to the corner gas station instead. Inside, beneath humming fluorescent lights, the clerk with nicotine fingers and a baseball cap looked him over. "You at the Willow place," the man said, not asking. "Temporarily." Michael set a pack of batteries on the counter. "You know why that house is like it is?" The clerk chewed the side of his cheek. "Some places don't forget. Basements especially. Water moves under there. Things carried in, not carried out." He rang up the batteries and added, almost kindly, "If you hear knocking, it's already in the walls." Michael left with coffee he didn't drink and a map he didn't need. On the telephone pole outside the station, the wind flapped a sun-bleached flyer. "Missing January 1986, boy age 9, last seen near Willow Street." Below it, another, 1999, girl age 7, last seen by the old maples. Thumbtacks rusted like dried blood held them in place. He reached up without thinking and pressed one tack deeper. The metal was cold enough to sting. Back at the house, the living room smelled faintly of pennies. The chair he had wedged under the basement knob lay tipped on its side, as if someone had nudged it with a foot while he was gone. The bookcase still blocked the door, but the 2 nails he had driven into the trim now lay on the floorboards parallel to each other, ends pointing toward the kitchen like arrows. He crouched and touched one. It was warm. He set up a line of baby powder across the hallway, a trick he'd learned from a paranormal forum and mocked in print a year earlier. He dusted the floor thick from the living room threshold to the basement door and photographed the smooth, white strip. He wrote the time in his notebook, 12:41 p.m., and taped a pencil across the doorknob, the way teachers balance rulers, to see if something moves. Upstairs, he started opening closets. In the master bedroom, the smell deepened. Mildew tangled with a sweet rot that raised goose flesh. Behind a row of cracked coat hangers, the back panel hung loose. He pried it with a butter knife and found a shallow cavity stuffed with brittle newspapers and a coffee tin mottled green with age. Inside the tin lay a brass key gone black with tarnish, a Polaroid curled at the edges, and a cassette tape labeled in careful block letters, December 10th. The Polaroid showed the Carter family he'd read about, father, mother, 2 kids in their pajamas on the basement steps. The faces were washed with that Polaroid flash, pupils blown, smiles too wide. In the lower right corner someone had written, "We tried the door. It doesn't lead down." He took the cassette to his laptop and popped it into a cheap USB player he carried for interviews with old-timers who refused smartphones. The tape clicked and whirred. Static at first, then a man's breath, then a whisper. "If you're hearing this, we did not make it to Christmas." Michael froze. The voice on the tape had that flat Midwestern cadence, unremarkable except for the way it carried dread like a second tone. "We move a wall," the voice went on. "It wasn't bricks. It was a mouth. She wanted us to widen it. She likes when the house is hungry, but she hates when it eats." A scrape, like the mic against wood. Then softer, "It knocks to practice our names." Something thumped below him, dull and far away. The tape continued, "Don't follow the bells. They aren't bells. They're teeth in a jar." And then cut to a child in the background counting 1, 2, 3 in a hush, as if playing hide and seek with someone she didn't dare wake. Michael stood so quickly the chair toppled. He ran to the hallway. The baby powder, pristine when he'd left, now bore a single set of footprints leading from the basement door to the kitchen. Small prints, heel to toe, too neat to be adult. The pencil balanced on the knob was gone. He found it 30 feet away, standing upright on the kitchen table. The sharpened tip dug half a millimeter into the wood, as if trying to burrow. He followed the powder prints with the camera rolling. They ended at the pantry. Inside the pantry, behind canned peaches left by some previous tenant, a hairline crack ran down the plaster like a seam. He pressed his ear to it. A sound came up through the wall, soft and wet, like something chewing in a distant room. He fetched the butter knife again and scored the seam. The plaster flaked, then gave way in a chalky avalanche, revealing not studs and insulation, but old lathe boards arranged in a pattern like ribs around a throat. The space beyond breathed stale air into his face. On the bottom shelf, tucked where the wall and floor met, sat a mason jar cloudy with age. Inside, Something knocked against the glass with the steady patience of a metronome. He didn't touch it. He set the camera on the shelf and filmed his own hand shaking. He returned to the cassette. The father's voice, thinner now, whispered, "We thought it was the basement." It wasn't. It was the house teaching us where down really is. Then a woman's voice, tight with a terror she refused to let the children hear. "If anyone finds this, leave the pantry closed. Feed it nothing. Name no names." A gust came from nowhere and slammed the pantry door just short of his nose. The house took a long, delighted breath. Michael grabbed the knob and held it shut as something on the other side pressed back with gentle, playful pressure, as if a small hand wanted to lace its fingers through his. He counted backward from 10. He let go. He stepped away. He waited. When nothing else moved, he opened the door again. The jar had shifted an inch toward the edge, and faint smudges the size of teeth marked the inside of the glass in a ragged ring. He carried the jar to the dining room table and set it down beside the Polaroid and the brass key. He took photos from 3 angles. He told the empty house what a rational man tells himself. This is an object, this is a container, this is explainable. And then a telephone rang upstairs. It wasn't his cell. It was the old rotary phone mounted in the hall that he had seen weeks earlier with a line cut and the dial stuck on a half-turn. It rang like a church bell in a storm. He sprinted up, took the receiver, and felt cold seep from the earpiece into the bones of his face. "Hello," he said, and the line crackled with distance that wasn't measured in miles. A child's voice whispered, very close, as if her mouth were against the other end of the handset. "You brought our teeth to the table." Michael's knees almost buckled. "Who is this?" "We're under the stairs," she said, not answering. "Not the basement stairs, the real stairs." "Bring the key." "The door behind the door." "Do you remember what time it is?" He looked at his watch. It was 3:14 p.m. The second hand crept. The line hummed like a live wire. "What happens at 3:15? He asked. Silence, then a new voice, older, raw, a man whose throat had learned to scream without sound. The same voice from the tape. "Don't let it ring 3 times, he said. "If it rings 3 times, it learns your name." The phone bell chimed again in his hand, impossibly, though the receiver was lifted. 1, 2, metallic, solemn notes shivering the plaster. He yanked the earpiece away as if it were hot and slammed the receiver down. The bell choked mid-note. The house seemed to lean, disappointed. He stood in the hallway, breathing hard, listening to the quiet roar of a place that had chosen him. His eyes fell to the baseboard along the staircase. A section near the landing had been painted over a lighter white than the rest, and along the seam someone had scored a thin outline, no more than a hand wide, an extra panel where there should have been none. He fetched the brass key and pressed it blindly along the baseboard. Near the middle, it found a tiny, hidden keyhole and slid in with the magnetic simplicity of a decision already made. The lock turned. Something inside turned back. A draft slipped out, bringing with it the smell of cellars and pennies and winter clothes sealed too long in a trunk. Michael eased the panel open. Beyond lay a narrow, lightless space. He lifted his phone's flashlight and shined it inside, expecting joists, expecting dust. Instead, he saw a short wood stairway going steeply down into a place that could not exist inside the geometry of the house. A stairway whose first step began where his shadow ended. Behind him, on the dining room table, the mason jar knocked once. From below the hidden stair, something rang a small, bright note that could have been a bell or a tooth striking glass. Michael tightened his grip on the key, felt its cold teeth bite his palm, and put one foot on the first impossible step. The stairs beneath the house. Michael stood at the threshold of the hidden opening, his flashlight quivering in his hand. The wood of the narrow staircase looked wrong, too smooth, as if polished by years of hands and feet that were never meant to climb it. The steps descended into darkness, so thick the light seemed to be swallowed whole, falling only a few feet before fading into black. The smell that drifted upward was stronger now, iron and damp earth, laced with a faint sweetness, like spoiled fruit. He took a deep breath and placed his foot on the first step. It groaned beneath his weight, but not in the way old wood usually did. This sound was hollow, echoing, as though the stair itself were a drum. With each cautious step, the air grew colder. His breath fogged in front of him, and sweat from fear clung icy against his skin. At the bottom of the staircase, the light revealed a cramped corridor lined with boards that curved slightly inward, giving the impression that he was walking through the ribcage of some colossal beast. His fingers brushed the wall and recoiled instantly. It was damp, not from water, but from something sticky like resin or blood. Halfway down the hall, he found carvings etched into the wood. Names, dozens of them, some written cleanly in block letters, others jagged, as if scratched by frantic hands. He ran the beam of light across them and froze. The last name carved was his own, Michael Harris. He staggered back, the flashlight beam shaking wildly across the walls. His chest tightened. Someone, or something, had known he was coming. He fumbled for his phone to snap a photo, but when he raised the screen, the carved letters were gone. The wood was smooth, blank, as if mocking him for believing his own eyes. A faint sound tugged at him. It was coming from deeper in the hall. A child's laughter, soft, lilting, but layered, as though many children were laughing in unison. He pressed forward, against every instinct screaming for him to turn back. The corridor ended at a small door, no taller than 4 feet. Its surface was warped, the paint bubbled like blistered skin. The brass key in his hand seemed to pulse with warmth, begging to be used. When he slid the key into the lock, the door trembled slightly, as if something behind it had been waiting. The latch clicked. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow chamber lit by an unnatural glow, pale green and flickering like light through swamp water. The source wasn't lamps, but jars. Hundreds of mason jars lined crude wooden shelves. Inside each jar floated teeth, tiny milk-white baby teeth, hundreds of them, some cracked, some blackened. A faint chiming filled the chamber, like glass tapping glass, as though the teeth were rattling of their own accord. Michael's stomach lurched. He staggered forward, gagging, his light sweeping across the room. In the center stood a small table. Upon it rested a single jar, larger than the others, the glass foggy and streaked with condensation. Something moved inside, a shape pressed against the glass, a small mouth, opening and closing as if gasping for air. The jar rattled once, then fell silent. On the table next to it lay a notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Scrawled handwriting covered every inch, the words frantic, the ink smeared as if written in the dark. He flipped through, his hands trembling. The entries were dated between 1977 and 1978. They belonged to Thomas Carter, the father who had murdered his family. Michael read aloud, his voice shaking. The house chooses who it speaks to. It whispered through the walls at night, first to me, then to the children. They said it wanted their laughter, their voices, their teeth. I thought I could bargain with it, but it always wants more. The jars feed her. She says teeth hold memory, and children's teeth taste the sweetest. Michael slammed the book shut while burning in his throat. A faint shuffle came from behind him. Slowly he turned. The small door had closed. The air pressed heavy around him. The jars rattled in unison. One toppled and shattered, spilling teeth across the floor. They clinked and rolled, circling his boots as though pulled by invisible strings. Then, from a far shelf, a shape uncurled itself. A figure crawled forward impossibly thin, its limbs jerking with insect-like spasms. Its face was a blur of shadow, except for its mouth, stuffed with rows of jagged, mismatched teeth, all sizes, all shapes, as if stolen from dozens of victims. The figure whispered with a child's voice and an old man's rasp overlapping. You shouldn't have come down the stairs. Michael stumbled back, his light trembling, the beam falling across the shelves of jars. Each one began to glow, a chorus of whispers rising, hundreds of voices murmuring his name. Michael, Michael, Michael. The thing crawled closer, its mouth stretching into a grin that split its cheeks. Its teeth clicked like wind chimes. The air grew so cold his breath crystallized before his face. Michael dropped the notebook, grabbed the large jar from the table, and clutched it to his chest. Inside, The small mouth moved faster now, whispering so faintly he almost couldn't hear. Set me free and run. Set me free. Michael's hands shook as he held the large jar against his chest. The fog glass was slick, cold as ice, yet the faint whisper from within warmed his ear. Set me free and run. The creature with the mismatched teeth lurched closer, its limbs scraping across the wooden floor like claws on bone. Each movement made the jars rattle louder, their whispers overlapping in a cacophony of voices. Children, men, women, all repeating his name. Michael! Michael! He stumbled backward, his shoulder striking the shelf. More jars tipped, their teeth spilling onto the floor, scattering like grains of rice. But instead of lying still, they rolled toward him, circling his feet, clicking together as if alive. The figure hissed, its jaw cracking wide enough to unhinge. Rows of stolen teeth gleamed wet in the greenish light. It crawled onto the table where the jar had rested moments before, crouching like a spider. Michael knew he had seconds. He raised the jar in both hands, considering smashing it against the floor, but a thought clawed its way into his mind. What if breaking it sets something worse free? He hesitated. The whisper came again, more urgent now, more human. Please, please, before it takes you too. Michael squeezed his eyes shut and slammed the jar against the ground. It shattered in a burst of glass and smoke, the sound like a bell tolling underwater. The whisper stopped. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent. Then a shape poured out of the broken glass, not crawling, not walking, but flowing like liquid shadow. It rose, stretching taller than the shelves, its form shifting between the outline of a woman and a column of smoke. Its eyes glowed faintly, two pale orbs that burned into him. The creature on the table shrieked, recoiling. The rows of teeth inside its mouth clattered together as if screaming in terror. The shadowy figure spoke, its voice layered, echoing with the cadence of 1,000 tongues. You should not have freed me. Michael's stomach dropped. He stumbled back, his heel crunching on glass. The figure spread its arms, and every jar in the chamber shattered at once, teeth spilling like hailstones across the floor. The whispers returned, deafening, until it seemed the very wood of the walls was vibrating with their chant. We are hungry. The lights of his phone and flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into near-total darkness. Only the faint, unnatural glow from the teeth lit the chamber now. They pulsed like fireflies, illuminating the writhing shadow as it lunged toward the creature on the table. Michael used the chaos to bolt for the small door. He clawed it open and scrambled into the narrow corridor. The air behind him filled with shrieks, one from the shadow he had freed, the other from the thing with the jagged mouth. The sound twisted into something worse. Laughter. As he sprinted toward the staircase, the corridor seemed longer than before. His flashlight sputtered back on for a moment, revealing the carved names on the wall. This time, they were all glowing faintly. His name, Michael Harris, was there again, only now, beneath it was another word, taken. He gasped and shoved forward. At the base of the staircase, he felt the house shift, the wood groaning like the hull of a sinking ship. The stairs stretched upward into shadow, elongating, as though the house was trying to keep him inside. A cold hand brushed his ankle. He screamed, kicking wildly, his boot connecting with something that crunched like bone. He scrambled up, dragging himself step by step, his breath ragged. The whispers swelled again, now coming not just from the basement, but from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling above. Stay, stay, stay. Michael burst out into the hallway, slamming the panel shut behind him. He shoved the brass key into the lock, twisting until it snapped. The air grew still. Silence fell, broken only by his own panting breath. But the victory was short. From the dining room, he heard it. The steady tap, tap, tap of something knocking against glass. He stepped forward slowly, dread heavy in his chest. On the table, among the shards of the broken jar, the teeth were moving. One by one, they dragged themselves together, clicking into a pile that began to form the outline of a mouth. The mouth whispered, in the same child's voice as before, We're not free yet. You are. And then, as if mocking him, the pile of teeth smiled. The mouth on the table. Michael stood frozen in the dining room, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning above water. The pile of teeth on the table shifted again, their clinking like wind chimes in a storm. The broken pieces of glass trembled, pulled inward as though magnetized to the grotesque shape. Slowly, the teeth arranged themselves into a perfect, ghastly smile, rows of white gleaming under the dim light. The mouth spoke again, the child's whisper echoing unnaturally in the hollow house. You open the way. Now you must carry us. Michael staggered backward, bumping into a chair that screeched across the wood floor. His mind reeled. He wanted to run out the front door, sprint into the street, leave Willow Street forever. But when he glanced toward the front windows, his blood turned to ice. Through the glass, the outside world was wrong. The neighborhood was gone. The maples were gone. Beyond the porch stretched a black expanse, endless and shifting, as though the house now floated in a void. The only thing visible in the distance was a faint row of lights, swinging softly, like lanterns or teeth. Michael's hands trembled violently. He pulled his phone from his pocket, desperate to call anyone, to anchor himself to reality. But when he unlocked it, the screen didn't show numbers or apps. It displayed a single line of text. How many names do you remember? The words pulsed, waiting. His thumb hovered above the screen, too terrified to type. Then, without his input, letters began appearing one by one. Michael Harris. He dropped the phone. It landed face up, and the screen went black. The mouth on the table widened, its rows of teeth grinding together like millstones. The sound reverberated in his skull. Then the mouth spat out words, each syllable punctuated by a click. Go to the basement. Go to the door behind the door. She's waiting. Michael clenched his fists. No, he whispered, more to himself than to the thing. I'm not playing your game. I'm leaving. He grabbed his bag, shoved his camera and recorder inside, and charged for the front door. He twisted the knob, flung it open, and stopped dead. The doorway no longer opened onto the porch. Instead, it revealed the narrow rib-like corridor he had just escaped, stretching downward into that impossible chamber. The sickly green glow of the jars pulsed faintly in the distance. A gust of damp, metallic air rushed past him, carrying whispers that coiled around his ears. Come back. Come back. He slammed the door shut, heart hammering, then whirled toward the kitchen. The back door, his last hope, stood half open. He bolted for it, but when he crossed the threshold, his stomach flipped. He was standing in the upstairs hallway now, staring at the locked panel where the hidden stair had first been revealed. The house was folding in on itself, twisting space, hurting him like prey. Stop it, he screamed, his voice cracking. I'm not yours. From every wall, the house groaned, with stretching, nails creaking, plaster raining down in powdery clouds. The sound was almost like laughter. Michael stumbled into the master bedroom, slamming the door. He pressed his back against it, struggling to breathe. In the corner of the room, the old rotary phone sat on a small table, its cord snaking along the wall like a vein. He hadn't touched it since it rang earlier. But now, without warning, the dial began to spin on its own, faster and faster, the clicking rapid and sharp. The phone rang once. The sound drilled into his bones. It rang twice. Michael pressed his hands over his ears, screaming for it to stop. It rang a third time. The walls went silent. The entire house seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, the phone receiver lifted itself from the cradle, dangling in the air. The voice that came through was no longer a whisper, but a scream layered with hundreds of others. Michael Harris. The sound slammed into him like a physical blow. His ears rang, blood trickled from his nose. The house had learned his name. The lights in the room flickered violently, then burst, showering sparks. In the sudden darkness, Michael fumbled for his flashlight. When he turned it on, the beam fell across the far wall. His blood froze. Every inch of the wallpaper was now carved with his name, over and over, scratched deep, as though dozens of hands had scrawled it in frenzy. Michael Harris. Michael Harris. Michael Harris. and in the center of the wall, scratched deeper than the rest, was a message. Come down. You are hungry too. Michael's flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, he wasn't alone. In the corner of the room stood the Carter children. Their skin was pale, eyes hollow sockets, their mouths filled not with normal teeth, but with shards of glass and bone. They smiled in unison. The boy stepped forward, tilting his head unnaturally, and whispered in that same layered voice from the mouth on the table. You set her free. Now, she needs you to feed her. The children of the house. Michael staggered backward until his shoulders slammed against the carved wall. The Carter children stood motionless in the corner, their faces pale as candle wax, their eyes yawning holes of blackness. Their smiles stretched too wide, glassy teeth grinding with a sound like bottles breaking underfoot. The girl's dress was soaked dark at the hem, as if she had been standing ankle-deep in water that wasn't there. The boy's hands twitched at his sides, long nails clicking against each other like insect legs. Michael tried to steady his breath. You're not real, he whispered. His voice cracked, betraying him. You're just part of this house. The boy tilted his head, a jerk too sharp for human muscles, and stepped forward. The sound of his bare feet on the wooden floor was wet, sticky, as though the boards themselves bled beneath his steps. The girl followed, her head lowering, her hollow eyes locked on Michael's trembling form. In unison, their voices came, layered, distorted, as if spoken from beneath water. We are not ghosts. We are what's left when she is finished. Michael's flashlight beam shook violently. He pointed it at them, the light bouncing across their sunken faces. The children hissed, but didn't vanish. Instead, they lifted their arms, pointing toward the bedroom closet. The door rattled as if something inside wanted out.